In the crushing black silence of the deep ocean, where light dies long before it can ever touch the seafloor and pressure turns ordinary life into impossible geometry, there exists a creature so ancient, so alien in design, that even modern biology struggles to explain why it still survives at all. And this is where the story begins, not in myth, but in cold scientific reality that feels more like fiction than nature itself. Because somewhere between 50 and 1500 meters below the surface, drifting through the midnight zone like a nightmare that never learned to evolve away, the frilled shark moves with a quietness that feels wrong, as if it were borrowed from a world that no longer exists, a living relic from a time before humans, before mammals, before most of what we call modern life had even begun to take shape, and yet it is still here, still hunting, still breathing in water so dark it swallows every trace of identity. And the first thing that makes it so impossible to explain is not just its age, but its design, because when you see it for the first time, you don't see a shark in the conventional sense, you see something closer to an eel that forgot how evolution was supposed to finish it, a body stretched into a serpentine silhouette, soft and almost primitive, moving with an unsettling fluidity that feels more like an idea than an animal, and then comes the mouth, and everything changes. The frilled shark does not simply open its jaws like modern predators, it unfolds them, revealing rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth, around 300 of them arranged in more than 25 rows, all curved inward like a biological trap that has no intention of letting anything escape once it enters. And those teeth are not just for show, they are built for swallowing prey whole, often squid and deep-sea fish. But the real horror is not what it eats. It is how little we understand its hunting behavior. Because in an environment where visibility is nearly zero, this creature seems to rely on a combination of slow-motion ambush and sensory systems that are still not fully mapped by science, as if evolution gave it just enough tools to survive, but never enough for us to fully decode it. Discovered formally in the late 19th century, the frilled shark was initially treated almost like a mistake, a specimen so strange that early scientists thought it might be a transitional form, a missing link, or even a survivor from a prehistoric era, and in a way, they were right, because genetically and structurally, it belongs to one of the most ancient shark lineages on Earth, a branch that diverged hundreds of millions of years ago, long before the oceans began to resemble what we know today. And yet it never left, it never adapted into something more efficient or more specialized in the modern sense, it simply persisted, unchanged in many ways, like a biological echo that refused to fade out. What makes this even more unsettling is that despite its primitive appearance, the frilled shark is not weak, it is not struggling, it is not a failed design, it is a perfectly functional predator of the deep, moving through environments so extreme that most marine life cannot survive there at all, where oxygen levels drop, temperature plummets, and pressure can crush unadapted bodies instantly, and still it survives. Which forces scientists into a paradox. How can something so ancient be so perfectly suited for a world we barely understand? And this is where the mystery deepens, because every time researchers encounter it, whether accidentally in fishing nets or through deep-sea submersibles, they are met with the same eerie impression. A creature that seems less like it evolved and more like it was placed there, as if the deep ocean preserved it not as a species, but as a concept. Its movement adds to this unsettling impression, because unlike the fast, aggressive motion of modern sharks, the frilled shark glides with slow, deliberate undulations, conserving energy in a place where food is scarce and encounters are rare. And this behavior suggests an evolutionary strategy so different from surface predators that it almost feels like an alternate branch of logic, one that prioritizes endurance over dominance, patience over speed, silence over impact. Even its senses remain partially mysterious, with lateral line systems and electroreception likely playing roles in detecting prey in total darkness, but the exact balance of these abilities is still not fully understood, leaving gaps that science has yet to fill. And perhaps the most haunting part of all is that we do not know how many exist, or how often they reproduce, or how their populations truly function in the vast, inaccessible depths they inhabit, meaning that every encounter feels less like a study and more like a rare glimpse into something we were never meant to see clearly in the first place. And as we descend deeper into its biology, it becomes increasingly clear that the frilled shark is not just unusual, it is fundamentally difficult to categorize, a living contradiction between ancient simplicity and modern survival, and this contradiction is exactly where our story truly begins to unravel. To understand why the frilled shark refuses to fit into anything we know about modern marine evolution, we have to go deeper than appearance and into the mechanics of how it actually lives, because beneath that serpentine body lies a biological architecture that feels like it was engineered under completely different rules, where efficiency is not measured in speed or power, but in endurance across unimaginable darkness. And the first major clue comes from its skeleton, which is not made of true bone like mammals or many fish, but of cartilage, a softer, lighter structure that has remained largely unchanged for hundreds of millions of years, placing it among the most primitive surviving shark lineages. And yet this so-called primitiveness is deceptive, because in the deep ocean, being light, flexible, and energy efficient is not a limitation, it is an advantage so refined that evolution never bothered to replace it. The frilled shark's body is elongated not for elegance, but for survival in a world where every movement must be calculated to conserve energy, where prey is scarce and encounters are unpredictable, and so its muscles are designed for slow bursts rather than sustained speed, allowing it to ambush rather than chase, to wait rather than pursue, and this alone challenges our surface-level assumptions about what makes a successful predator, because here, success is defined not by dominance but by patience stretched across geological time. Then there is the jaw mechanism, one of the most disturbing adaptations in the deep-sea world, because unlike most sharks that extend their upper jaw slightly during feeding, the frilled shark can extend its jaws forward in a sudden, almost explosive motion, turning its head into a snapping trap that can engulf prey in a fraction of a second, and when combined with those inward curving teeth, escape becomes nearly impossible once prey is caught. Yet even this terrifying adaptation is not about aggression in the way we understand it, it is about efficiency in an environment where every failed strike could mean weeks without food. Its eyes, meanwhile, tell another part of the story, large and dark, adapted for the faintest traces of light, not for clarity but for detection, because in the midnight zone there is no such thing as sharp vision, only silhouettes, shadows, and bioluminescent flickers from other creatures drifting through the abyss. And the frilled shark is thought to use this minimal light not to track movement in detail, but to sense presence itself, reacting to disturbances in an environment where seeing is less important than knowing something is there. But what truly deepens the mystery is its reproductive biology, because unlike many fast-reproducing ocean species, the frilled shark is believed to have one of the longest gestation periods known in sharks, potentially lasting more than 3 years, with live birth rather than egg-laying, meaning that every offspring represents a massive investment of time and energy in an environment where survival is never guaranteed. And this raises a question that scientists still struggle with: how does a species this ancient, this slow, and this energy-conservative avoid extinction in a world that constantly changes above it? The answer may lie in the stability of the deep ocean itself, a realm so isolated from surface disruptions that evolutionary pressure moves at a different pace entirely, allowing ancient traits to persist not because they are superior in a general sense, but because they are perfectly suited to a very specific and unchanging environment. And in that sense, the frilled shark is not an evolutionary mistake, but a survivor of a parallel timeline of Earth's history that continues beneath the waves. Even its encounters with humans reinforce its mystery, because most observations come not from deliberate study but from accidental capture in deep-sea fishing nets, where these creatures are brought to the surface already under stress, their bodies reacting poorly to rapid pressure changes, often dying before they can be properly studied, which means that much of what we know is incomplete, fragmented, and based on moments of unintended contact rather than sustained observation in their natural habitat. And this limitation is crucial, because it means we are trying to understand a creature designed for an environment we cannot truly enter, using tools and perspectives built for a world it does not inhabit, which inevitably leaves gaps in our understanding that no amount of technology has fully closed. The deeper we look into its anatomy and behavior, the more it becomes clear that the frilled shark does not behave like a species trying to evolve toward complexity, but like one that achieved a perfect balance long ago and simply continued along that path without deviation, unchanged not because it is stagnant, but because it has no reason to change in a world where survival is already optimized for conditions we can barely imagine. And as we move further into the biological logic of this creature, we begin to see that the real mystery is not just how it lives, but why it feels so disconnected from the evolutionary narratives we use to explain everything else in the ocean, as if it belongs to a chapter of Earth's story that we have only partially read, leaving the rest submerged in darkness, waiting for us to descend even deeper. If there is one reason the frilled shark continues to resist every attempt at full scientific explanation, it is because it lives in a realm that does not just challenge observation, it actively limits it, as if the deep ocean itself is protecting a secret that evolution wrote long ago and never intended to fully reveal, and when we finally step back from its anatomy, its hunting mechanics, its ancient lineage, we are left with something even more unsettling than mystery alone. We are left with context, or rather the absence of it, because the frilled shark does not exist in isolation. It is part of an entire hidden ecosystem that operates on rules we are still only beginning to understand, a world where energy is scarce, encounters are rare, and survival is measured in patience stretched across years rather than seconds, and in that world, being unchanged is not a flaw. It is a strategy so stable that evolution has little incentive to rewrite it. Unlike many marine predators that rose to dominance in shallower, more dynamic waters, the frilled shark belongs to a deep evolutionary lineage that predates many of the ocean ecosystems we recognize today, meaning it is not adapting toward modern conditions because it never left the conditions it was already optimized for. And this is where the concept of living fossil becomes both useful and misleading, because it suggests stasis, when in reality what we are seeing is long-term success in an environment that rewards constancy over innovation, where change can often be a disadvantage rather than a benefit. But even this explanation begins to fall apart when we consider how little we actually observe of this species in its natural behavior, because most of what we know comes from rare, accidental encounters, brief glimpses of a creature that may spend its entire life moving through depths we cannot access, feeding, reproducing, and dying without ever intersecting human awareness. Which means our scientific model is built on fragments rather than continuity, snapshots rather than stories, and this is where the frilled shark becomes more than just a biological curiosity. It becomes a reminder of the limits of observation itself. Its apparent rarity may not even reflect true population density, but simply the inaccessibility of its habitat, a vast three-dimensional darkness that covers most of the planet but remains less explored than the surface of distant planets. And in that darkness, species like the frilled shark do not need to be numerous to persist, they only need to be consistent. Spread across a depth range so large that encounters between individuals may be rare but still sufficient for survival across evolutionary time. And yet, despite all of this logic, there remains an emotional response that science alone cannot fully erase, because when we look at the frilled shark, we are not just looking at a deep-sea predator, we are looking at something that feels temporally displaced, as if it belongs equally to the past and the present, a living bridge between eras of Earth's history that no longer exist on the surface, and this creates a subtle but powerful sense of unease. Not because it is dangerous to us, but because it reminds us that life on Earth is not a single narrative moving in one direction, but a layered archive of survival strategies, many of which are hidden far below our reach. In recent decades, advances in deep-sea exploration have slightly improved our understanding, but they have also reinforced how incomplete our picture remains, because every new encounter still feels like a discovery rather than a confirmation, each specimen still raising more questions than it answers, and this is especially true when considering how the frilled shark interacts with its environment, how it avoids predators, how it locates prey in near-total darkness, and how its population dynamics function over centuries rather than human timescales, all of which remain partially speculative. And so we arrive at the final contradiction. The frilled shark is both well understood in structure and deeply unknown in life, anatomically mapped yet behaviorally mysterious, evolutionarily ancient yet ecologically active, and this contradiction forces us to confront a larger truth about the ocean itself, that much of what we call known marine biology is actually just a thin illuminated layer sitting above a far larger, darker, and more complex reality. In the end, the frilled shark does not need to be explained in the way we typically demand from science, because its existence is already an answer to a different kind of question, one about persistence, about adaptation without transformation, about survival without visibility, and about life continuing in places where observation fails but evolution does not. And perhaps the most profound realization is that creatures like this are not anomalies waiting to be solved, but reminders that Earth is still full of systems operating beyond our comprehension, still writing evolutionary stories in the dark, still holding on to forms of life that predate our understanding of what life is supposed to become. And as long as the deep ocean remains largely uncharted, the frilled shark will remain what it has always been, not a puzzle to be fully solved, but a living boundary between what we know and what we have yet to even imagine.